It was a sweltering afternoon in downtown Atlanta. The sun beat down relentlessly, casting long shadows on the pavement as people bustled through the streets. At a small cafe on the corner of Peachtree and Baker Street, a black man in a tailored navy blue suit sat by the window, casually sipping his espresso while reviewing case files on his tablet. His face was calm, unreadable, but his eyes held the sharp intensity of a man who had spent years in courtrooms, fighting battles that changed lives. His name was Elijah Carter. What most people in the cafe didn't know was that he was the newly appointed Attorney General of Georgia, the highest-ranking legal officer in the state. But today, he was just another citizen enjoying a quiet afternoon at least. That's what he thought. Outside, a police cruiser rolled to a slow stop. Officer Brent Holloway, a white cop with 10 years on the force, leaned out his window. His eyes narrowed as he spotted Elijah through the glass. His gut twisted in the familiar way it always did when he saw a black man in an expensive suit. It didn't make sense to him. How could someone like that afford to sit in a fancy cafe, sipping espresso like he belonged? Holloway grabbed his radio. Dispatch, we got a suspicious individual at the corner of Peachtree and Baker. Might fit the description of the suspect from last night's robbery. 10-4. Proceed with caution, the dispatcher replied. But caution wasn't in Holloway's vocabulary. He threw the car into park, adjusted his belt, and stepped out. His boots hit the pavement with authority as he stormed toward the cafe door. But let's start from the very beginning. This channel won't survive without your support. If you enjoy stories like this filled with action, suspense, and real-life issues, then hit that subscribe button and smash that like so I can keep bringing you more. Your support makes all the difference. Now, back to the story. The cafe bell jingled as Holloway stepped inside. Conversations quieted. Eyes shifted toward the uniformed officer as he made a beeline for Elijah's table. Elijah barely looked up. He'd dealt with cops like Holloway before. He knew the type swaggering in like they owned the world, their hands itching to assert power where it wasn't needed. Can I help you, officer? Elijah asked, keeping his voice even. Holloway's eyes flicked to Elijah's expensive suit, then to the leather briefcase beside him. His mind had already made up a story. This was a crook playing dress-up, pretending to be someone he wasn't. You fit the description, Holloway said, his hand hovering near his holster. I need you to step outside. Elijah set his espresso down carefully. He folded his hands, leaning back in his seat. And what description would that be? Holloway's jaw tightened. Black male, medium build, dark suit, looks out of place. Matches a suspect from last night's robbery. Elijah let out a low breath, his patience stretching thin. I see. And do you have any actual evidence? Or are you just assuming I'm a criminal because I look out of place? I don't have to explain myself to you, Holloway snapped. Now, step outside before I make you. Elijah studied him for a long moment. Then, with practiced ease, he reached into his jacket pocket. Holloway's hand shot to his gun. Don't move, he barked. The cafe gasped. A woman let out a small shriek, but Elijah didn't flinch. He slowly pulled out a leather badge holder and flipped it open, revealing the gleaming insignia of the Attorney General of Georgia. For the first time, Holloway hesitated. His face paled as he read the name. Elijah Carter. The man he had just tried to unlawfully arrest wasn't just some random black man in a suit. He was the top legal authority in the entire state. A slow smirk spread across Elijah's lips. He could see the gears turning in Holloway's head, the dawning horror creeping into his expression. Well, officer, Elijah said smoothly, I'd love to hear your explanation now. For a long moment, Officer Brent Holloway just stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The Attorney General, the Attorney General. His pulse pounded against his temples. His grip on his holster tightened, as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. The cafe had gone silent. The customers, the baristas, everyone was staring, watching, waiting to see how this would unfold. Elijah Carter leaned back in his chair, his badge still held up between two fingers. His smirk had faded, replaced with something unreadable. Calculating. "I'm waiting," Elijah said, his voice smooth, measured. "You were so confident a minute ago. Surely you can explain why you nearly drew your weapon on the Attorney General of Georgia in the middle of a cafe." Holloway's jaw tightened. His mind scrambled for a way out, but there was no excuse for what had just happened. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. This doesn't change anything," Holloway said finally, his voice lower, gritted. "I was acting on a report. You fit the description." Elijah's brow arched. "You still haven't told me what description that is, other than black man in a suit, which, last I checked, isn't a crime." He tilted his head slightly. "Unless, of course, you have actual probable cause. Do you?" Holloway's lips pressed into a thin line. He had nothing. No evidence. No witness statements. No footage. Just his own assumptions. That had just landed him in the worst possible situation. The cafe door suddenly swung open, and another officer stepped inside. A younger man, dark-skinned, with short, neatly trimmed hair. Sergeant Malcolm Reese. Reese had been Holloway's partner for the past year, and he had seen this exact situation unfold too many times before. The moment he spotted Elijah, his stomach dropped. He knew exactly who the man was. Oh shit. He rushed forward, immediately sensing the tension in the air. "Officer Holloway," Reese said, his voice controlled but firm. "What's going on here?" Holloway didn't answer. Reese turned to Elijah, and recognition flashed in his eyes. "Attorney General Carter," Reese said quickly, his posture straightening. "Sir, I'd like to know why your partner attempted to arrest me without cause," Elijah interrupted, his voice cool but edged with steel. "And why he nearly pulled his weapon on me." Reese's throat tightened. He turned to Holloway. "Brent," he said quietly, but there was warning in his tone. "What the hell did you do?" Holloway's face was red now, whether from anger or embarrassment. Reese couldn't tell. "I was responding to a call," Holloway muttered. He fit the damn description. Reese took a slow, deep breath. He was done covering for this man. "No, he didn't," Reese said flatly. "The suspect from last night was caught on camera. He was 5'8", wearing a hoodie and jeans." Reese gestured to Elijah. "And Attorney General Carter is wearing a custom suit. He's also 6'2". His voice dropped lower, laced with frustration. "You didn't have a description, did you?" Holloway's nostrils flared. His hands clenched tighter at his sides. He had been caught. Elijah watched the exchange with quiet amusement, though his patience was wearing thin. Finally, he stood, adjusting the cuffs of his jacket. He didn't raise his voice, but when he spoke, his words carried the weight of authority. "I've dealt with a lot of bad cops in my time," Elijah said, locking eyes with Holloway. "But you're sloppy, reckless, and worst of all, you're predictable." He took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough that only Holloway and Reese could hear. "You saw a black man sitting in a nice cafe, wearing a suit, and assumed he didn't belong. You didn't think twice. You didn't ask questions. You just decided I was guilty of something because that's what men like you do." Holloway's fists trembled. His entire body tensed like a coil wound too tight. "You don't know me," he growled. Elijah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, I do." He turned to Reese. "Sergeant, I'd like to speak to your superior immediately." Reese nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir." He grabbed his radio and called for the precinct captain. Holloway let out a slow, shaky breath, his face burning. He could already feel his career slipping through his fingers. Then, just when he thought it couldn't get any worse, Elijah took out his phone and started recording. "This is Elijah Carter, Attorney General of Georgia," he said, holding the camera steady. "I was just racially profiled and unlawfully detained by an officer of the Atlanta Police Department. No probable cause, no justification, just the assumption that a black man in a suit must be a criminal." Holloway's blood ran cold. The cafe customers were still watching. The baristas whispered among themselves. And now the whole world was about to see. The cafe buzzed with nervous energy as Elijah Carter continued recording, his voice steady and deliberate. Every eye in the room was locked onto him, the Attorney General of Georgia, as he documented the blatant racial profiling he had just endured. Officer Brent Holloway stood frozen, his face a shade of red, so deep it nearly matched the neon open sign flickering in the cafe window. His mind raced, his body burned with humiliation. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be his moment of control. Instead, he was the one losing it. Sergeant Malcolm Reese, still gripping his radio, stared at the scene unfolding before him. He had tried to warn Holloway before, told him he needed to think before acting, to stop letting his biases dictate his decisions. But Holloway never listened, and now the damage was done. Elijah Carter, Elijah said, still recording, Attorney General of Georgia, I was unlawfully detained by Officer Holloway without cause, in a public cafe, while minding my business. This is what happens to black men in America, even the ones who run the justice system. The weight of that statement settled over the cafe like a thick fog. Holloway finally snapped. His pride wouldn't let him take this lying down. He took a step forward, pointing a shaking finger at Elijah. You're trying to make me look like a racist, Holloway hissed. This isn't what it looks like. Elijah let out a dry, humorless laugh. He angled the camera toward Holloway, making sure his badge and name tag were clearly visible. Oh, then tell me, Officer Holloway, what does this look like? Holloway's fists clenched at his sides. His entire body was trembling, not with fear, but with rage. The kind of rage that came when a man like him lost control of a situation he thought he had under his thumb. This is entrapment, Holloway snapped. You're twisting the situation. Elijah's expression didn't change. He stayed calm, collected. No, officer, you walked into this cafe and made a choice to profile me, a choice to humiliate me. And now, you're dealing with the consequences. The door swung open again. This time, the precinct captain walked in. Captain Jonathan Keller was an older white man with graying hair and a permanent scowl etched into his face. He had been in the force for over 30 years, had seen officers rise and fall under his command. He prided himself on maintaining a clean image for the department, keeping scandals at bay. And yet, here he was, walking straight into one. His eyes immediately flickered to Elijah, then to Holloway, then to Reese. He took in the tension in the room, the way customers were whispering, the way the baristas stood frozen behind the counter. And then his eyes landed on the phone in Elijah's hand, recording everything. His stomach dropped. Attorney General Carter, Captain Keller said, his voice level but cautious. What exactly is going on here? Elijah lowered his phone slightly but kept it recording. He gestured toward Holloway. Your officer detained me without cause, Elijah said simply. He claimed I fit the description of a suspect, despite having no actual evidence or matching details. And when I questioned him, he nearly pulled his weapon on me in a cafe full of people. Captain Keller's gaze flickered to Holloway, who was still standing rigid, his face tight with barely contained fury. Holloway, Keller said, his voice sharp now. Is this true? Holloway's throat bobbed. He knew he couldn't lie. Not with half the cafe as witnesses. Not with Elijah Carter holding damning footage in his hands. Holloway swallowed hard. I made a call based on a report. That's not what I asked, Keller snapped. His tone had shifted into something harder, less forgiving. Did you approach Attorney General Carter without probable cause? Did you attempt to detain him without reason? Silence. Holloway's jaw twitched. His fingers flexed. Every instinct screamed at him to defend himself, to argue, to fight. But he had already lost. Captain Keller turned back to Elijah, his expression unreadable. Sir, I apologize on behalf of the department. I assure you this incident will be investigated fairly. Elijah let out a slow breath, his eyes narrowing. An investigation, he scoffed. That's what you always say, an internal investigation. And then what? He gets desk duty for a month, a slap on the wrist. Keller didn't respond because they both knew Elijah was right. The room was suffocating with tension. The customers still weren't moving. The baristas were still frozen. Everyone was watching. And then Elijah did something that made Holloway's blood run cold. He stopped recording, and he dialed a number. Captain Keller watched as Elijah put the phone to his ear, his face unreadable. "Elijah Carter here," he said into the phone. "Yes, I need a full review of the Atlanta PD's recent stop and frisk reports. I also want records on racial profiling complaints for the past 3 years. No, make that 5. He paused, listening. "Yes, I want them on my desk by tomorrow morning." Holloway's stomach twisted into knots. Elijah locked eyes with him again, and this time, the smirk was back. "I suggest you get a good lawyer, Officer Holloway," Elijah said smoothly, "because this isn't going away." Holloway took an involuntary step back. He looked at Captain Keller, then at Reese, then back at Elijah. The realization was hitting him like a freight train. This wasn't just about one bad encounter. This was about his entire career. Holloway's heart pounded in his chest. His hands slick with sweat. He had faced disciplinary warnings before. Sure, but this was different. This wasn't a citizen filing a complaint that would disappear in a mountain of bureaucracy. This was the Attorney General himself. And Elijah Carter wasn't just letting this go. The cafe remained dead silent. Captain Keller pinched the bridge of his nose and exhaled slowly, knowing the severity of the situation. Elijah had just put the entire department under a microscope, and there was no easy way out of this. Elijah, Keller began carefully, lowering his voice. "Let's step outside and discuss this privately." Elijah let out a humorless chuckle. "Oh, now you want privacy." He shook his head. "No, Captain. Everything about this needs to be public. Every single word." Holloway could feel his world collapsing around him. His mind raced with excuses, justifications, anything to shift the blame. But then, the worst possible thing happened. The news cameras arrived. The door to the cafe swung open, and a flood of reporters pushed inside. Cameras rolling, microphones extended. They had been tipped off probably by one of the dozens of customers who had been filming the incident. And now the entire city of Atlanta was about to witness his downfall. "Elijah Carter," one reporter called out, shoving a mic toward him. "Can you confirm that Officer Holloway unlawfully detained you?" Elijah turned to the cameras, his expression composed. "That's exactly what happened," Elijah said. "I was racially profiled, detained without cause, and when I demanded an explanation, Officer Holloway told me." He paused, his eyes locking onto the officer in question. "That I fit the description." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The phrase had been caught on multiple phone recordings. There was no denying it. The reporter turned toward Holloway. "Officer, do you have a response?" Holloway's mouth opened and closed. He had nothing. No excuses. No defense. Because everyone already knew the truth. "Captain Keller," another reporter pressed, "how is the department handling this situation?" Keller's jaw tightened. He was backed into a corner. There was no spinning this. He could already hear the mayor breathing down his neck. "We will be launching a full investigation," Keller said stiffly. "The Atlanta Police Department does not tolerate misconduct of any kind." Elijah's expression darkened. "That's not enough." Keller turned toward him, wary. "What are you suggesting?" Elijah crossed his arms. "I want Officer Holloway suspended immediately, pending investigation." A murmur swept through the cafe. Holloway's stomach twisted into knots. Suspended? That was one step away from being fired. "You can't be serious," Holloway sputtered. "You can't just..." Elijah cut him off. "I can, and I will." Captain Keller hesitated, but only for a moment. Then, his gaze hardened. He turned to Holloway. "Hand over your badge and gun." Holloway's world stopped. His vision blurred at the edges. His fingers twitched at his sides. His lungs struggled for air. "What?" Holloway whispered. Keller's face was unreadable. "You heard me." Holloway shook his head, stepping back. His hands clutched at his badge as if it were his last lifeline. "You can't do this." "Actually," Elijah said coldly, "he can." Holloway looked around wildly, searching for an ally. But Sergeant Reese was avoiding his gaze. The other officers in the cafe stood stiffly, unwilling to speak up, because no one was going to save him. Not this time. With shaking hands, Holloway unpinned his badge from his chest and placed it in Keller's outstretched palm. Then, slowly, reluctantly, he unholstered his weapon and set it down on the cafe counter. The weight of his gun leaving his hands felt like the weight of his entire career being ripped away. Reporters snapped pictures. The cafe patrons whispered. A sense of finality settled over the room. Keller turned back to Elijah. Will that suffice for now? Elijah studied Holloway for a long moment before nodding. For now. Then, without another word, Elijah turned and walked toward the exit, the cameras following his every move. As the door shut behind him, Holloway collapsed into the nearest chair, his head in his hands. His career was over. But deep down, a more terrifying realization clawed at his gut. This wasn't just about him anymore. Because if Elijah Carter was digging into police records, he was going to find things that weren't meant to be found. The weight of Holloway's suspension spread through the Atlanta Police Department like wildfire. The moment the footage hit the news, it wasn't just the cafe patrons talking anymore. The entire city was watching. And so was the Justice Department. Elijah Carter sat in his office the next morning, his phone buzzing nonstop with calls from state officials, civil rights leaders, and law enforcement brass. But he wasn't answering. Not yet. He was waiting. Then right on time, his secretary's voice came through the intercom. Sir, Captain Keller and Sergeant Reese are here to see you. Elijah's lips curled slightly. Send them in. The door opened, and the two officers stepped inside. Keller looked exhausted, like he had aged a decade overnight. Reese, on the other hand, looked tense, his eyes scanning the office, taking in the law books, the framed degrees, the subtle power that radiated from the Attorney General's presence. Neither of them sat. Keller cleared his throat. Attorney General Carter, I wanted to personally assure you that Officer Holloway is on immediate suspension. His actions do not reflect the values of the Atlanta PD. Elijah leaned back in his chair, studying them. Captain Keller, let me ask you something. His voice was calm, controlled. How many times has Holloway been reported for misconduct? Keller's lips parted slightly. The question had caught him off guard. Elijah continued, because I had my team pull records. And what do you know? 5 separate complaints, all buried, all dismissed. Reese shifted uncomfortably. Keller's jaw tightened. Elijah didn't blink. Tell me, Captain, if I hadn't been the one he arrested, would anything have happened to him? Keller exhaled sharply. Look, this isn't easy. You know as well as I do that internal investigations. Elijah cut him off. Internal investigations don't mean anything when the system protects its own. Keller's mouth snapped shut. Elijah leaned forward. This isn't just about Holloway. This is about the culture you allow in your department. The same culture that lets officers like him profile black men and call it routine. The same culture that justifies you fit the description as an excuse for harassment. Reese finally spoke. His voice was rough, hesitant. What exactly are you planning to do? Elijah smiled. It wasn't friendly. I'm launching a full-scale investigation into the Atlanta PD, he said. Effective immediately. Keller's hands curled into fists. You're going after the entire department. Every complaint, Elijah confirmed. Every case of racial profiling. Every unjustified stop and frisk. Every use of force incident. If there's corruption, I'll find it. And I'll burn it to the ground. Reese swallowed hard. He wasn't dirty, but he knew plenty of officers who were. Plenty of powerful officers. If Elijah Carter started digging, he wasn't just going to expose Holloway, he was going to unearth secrets the department had buried deep. Keller was losing his patience. Carter, think about this. You'll be going up against your own law enforcement agencies. You really think that's going to go well for you? Elijah held his gaze. I don't care if it does. Keller sighed, running a hand down his face. Muck, you already got what you wanted. Holloway is suspended. The public saw it. Isn't that enough? Elijah's expression turned cold. You still don't get it, do you? Keller frowned. This isn't just about Holloway, Elijah said. This is about every black man who was stopped for no reason. Every person who was harassed, detained, or brutalized because of you fit the description. He leaned forward, eyes blazing. This is about making sure it never happens again. Keller and Reese exchanged looks. They both knew there was no stopping this. This was happening, and the department wasn't ready for what Elijah Carter was about to unleash. The city of Atlanta was on fire, not in the literal sense, but the media storm that followed Elijah Carter's announcement was unlike anything the police department had ever seen. Headlines dominated every major news outlet. Protests erupted outside police headquarters. Citizens demanded transparency. The mayor was forced into emergency meetings, and the governor himself called Elijah, urging him to reconsider before things spiraled out of control. But Elijah Carter had no intention of backing down. This wasn't just about one arrest anymore. This was about all of them. Inside police headquarters, Captain Keller sat at a conference table, surrounded by senior officers. The tension in the room was suffocating. This investigation is going to destroy us, Lieutenant Briggs muttered, tossing a thick file onto the table. He's going to dig into every case we've closed in the past decade. And what if he finds something? Another officer asked, voice tight. Everyone in that room knew there were things buried in department records that couldn't withstand scrutiny. Cases where reports were doctored. Incidents where body cam footage mysteriously disappeared. Officers with repeated complaints who had never faced discipline. Elijah Carter wasn't just looking for justice. He was ripping the foundation apart, and that made him dangerous. Captain Keller exhaled slowly. We'd have to be prepared for the worst. Lieutenant Briggs scoffed. The worst? You mean Carter taking down half the force? Because if he keeps digging, that's exactly what's going to happen. A younger officer shifted in his seat. We could fight this. We have allies, politicians, judges. But Keller shook his head. No, not this time. The public is on his side. If we push back too hard, we look guilty. Briggs clenched his jaw. We are guilty. No one disagreed. And that was the problem. Across town, Officer Holloway sat in his apartment, drowning in whiskey. He had lost everything. His badge, his gun, his career. And now, the department was treating him like a sacrificial lamb. The phone call he received earlier that morning had confirmed his worst fears. We can't protect you, Holloway. Not with this much attention. You're on your own, on his own. After years of serving the force, of upholding the same rules they all played by, they were throwing him away to save themselves. Rage boiled in his chest. This was Carter's fault. If that arrogant, self-righteous attorney general had just kept his mouth shut, none of this would be happening. Holloway's hands tightened around the empty whiskey glass. His mind raced, his pulse pounding. Maybe it wasn't over yet. Maybe there was still one way to fix this. Elijah Carter was sitting in his office late that evening, reviewing a stack of case files when his secretary buzzed in. Sir, there's an Officer Holloway here to see you. Elijah's brows lifted slightly. Holloway? Yes, sir. He's insisting. Elijah exhaled. He had no interest in entertaining a disgraced cop, but something about the urgency in her voice made him pause. Let him in. The door opened, and there he was, Holloway. His uniform was gone. His eyes were bloodshot. His stance was wrong, too tense, too aggressive. Elijah knew immediately that something was off. The door shut behind him. Silence. Holloway's lips twisted. You destroyed my life. Elijah leaned back, folding his hands. You did that yourself. Holloway let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You think you're a hero, don't you? You think you're saving the world. Elijah didn't flinch. I think I'm doing what should have been done a long time ago. Holloway's hand twitched toward his waistband, and Elijah saw it. A gun? The air shifted. Elijah's mind went into overdrive. There was no way Holloway was dumb enough to try something here, was there? Holloway took a step forward, voice low. Do you know what it feels like to lose everything, Carter? To be abandoned, humiliated. Elijah's eyes remained locked on Holloway's hands. You should leave. Holloway's breath came faster. His fingers brushed the grip of his concealed weapon. Elijah didn't move. You have one chance to walk out of here, he said coldly, before you do something you can't take back. Holloway's teeth clenched. His fingers curled tighter. And then, bang! The office door burst open. Federal agents swarmed the room. Drop the weapon. Holloway barely had time to react before 6 guns were trained on him. His entire body froze. One wrong move and he was dead. His breath hitched. His mind reeled. Then, slowly, carefully, he raised his hands. A grin smirk played on Elijah's lips. I was expecting you, he said. Holloway's stomach dropped. This was a setup. Elijah Carter had anticipated that Holloway would try something reckless. He had laid a trap. And now, Holloway was done. The next morning, the headlines had changed. Suspended officer attempts to confront Attorney General. Federal agents intervene. Holloway in custody. Investigation expands into police misconduct and cover-ups. Atlanta PD faces major reforms as Justice Department takes action. Elijah Carter stood before a podium, addressing the press. The weight of the past week hung on his shoulders, but he stood tall. This is just the beginning, he told the world. Systemic corruption does not disappear overnight, but we will hold those in power accountable. No more cover-ups. No more injustice. No more you fit the description. The crowd erupted in applause, and somewhere, deep inside his prison cell, Holloway watched the broadcast, his hands clenched into fists. This wasn't over. Not yet. If you like this story, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, in order to strengthen our community, I would like to know where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video. Let me know in the comments.